The winter wind whistled through the concrete canyons of New York City, its icy fingers finding every gap in the tattered military jacket worn by a woman sitting outside Grand Central Station. Her weathered hands clutched a small cardboard sign that read "Veteran, any help appreciated." The morning rush hour was in full swing, with hundreds of people streaming past, their faces buried in phones or coffee cups, barely noticing the figure huddled against the cold stone wall. The woman's eyes remained focused on the ground, counting the cracks in the sidewalk to pass the time. She'd been doing this for so long now that she'd developed a routine: arrive early, find a spot away from other homeless folks, and try to stay warm. Her military training had taught her survival skills, but nothing had prepared her for life on the streets. She noticed expensive shoes walking past, business people heading to their offices in the towering skyscrapers that surrounded the station, designer boots, polished Oxfords, running shoes, each pair telling its own story of comfort and stability, everything she'd lost after returning home from service. The sound of voices growing louder caught her attention. Not the usual commuter chatter, but the distinctive tone of authority, security personnel coordinating movements. She'd heard that tone countless times during her military service. Looking up, she saw a group of men in dark suits approaching, their earpieces and alert eyes marking them as security detail. In the center of the group walked a familiar figure, tall, with distinctive hair and an unmistakable bearing. Former President Donald Trump, dressed in a long dark overcoat, moved through the morning crowd. People began to notice, phones coming up to capture photos, the quiet morning erupting into excited whispers and pointing fingers. The veteran straightened her posture instinctively, military training kicking in even after all these years. She wasn't looking for attention, especially not from someone like Trump. She just wanted to get through another day. But as the group drew closer, something unexpected happened. Trump's pace slowed as he passed her. His eyes caught the military insignia on her jacket, worn and faded but still visible. The security detail continued forward for a moment before realizing their charge had stopped. They quickly reorganized, forming a protective circle as Trump turned toward the veteran. "You served," his voice cut through the morning noise. The crowd around them grew still, phones now recording what was unfolding. The veteran nodded, her voice rough from lack of use. "Yes, sir. 3 tours." The next few moments would change everything, though she didn't know it yet. As Trump stepped closer, his security detail exchanged concerned glances. This wasn't part of the plan. But something in the veteran's eyes, a mix of pride and resignation, strength and exhaustion, had caught the former president's attention. People gathered at a respectful distance, watching as one of the most recognized figures in the world stopped to talk to a homeless veteran on a cold New York morning. Some pulled out their phones to record, others just stood and watched, their morning commute forgotten as they witnessed something extraordinary beginning to unfold. The veteran slowly rose to her feet, her joints stiff from the cold and from sitting for so long. As she stood, her military bearing was unmistakable despite her circumstances. The crowd watched in hushed anticipation, not yet knowing they were about to witness a story that would touch hearts across the nation and spark a conversation about how America treats its veterans. The morning crowd held their breath as Trump gestured to the veteran's jacket. "Marines?" he asked, his voice softer than his usual public speaking tone. The veteran nodded, unconsciously straightening the wrinkled fabric. "Yes, sir." "Force recon." A flicker of recognition crossed Trump's face. He knew what that meant. Force recon was among the most elite units in the Marine Corps. "How long have you been out here?" Trump asked, ignoring his aide who was trying to remind him about his schedule. The veteran's weathered face showed a moment of hesitation before answering. 8 months, sir. But that's not important. There are others who have it worse." Trump's security detail had formed a wider perimeter now, keeping the growing crowd at a respectful distance. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Is this real?" while others recorded the unexpected encounter on their phones. But neither Trump nor the veteran seemed to notice the attention they were drawing. "Tell me what happened," Trump said, and for once, there were no cameras in his face, no political reporters analyzing his every word. This wasn't about politics or photo ops. This was about a veteran who'd served her country with distinction and now sat on the cold streets of New York. The veteran's story came out slowly at first, then in a steady stream. 3 tours in Afghanistan, night operations, close combat situations, then the struggles that followed her return home, the nightmares that wouldn't stop, the VA appointments that kept getting rescheduled, the medication that helped with the pain but clouded her mind so much she couldn't work. I had a good job in security, she explained, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. But the PTSD, it got worse, started missing work. The bills piled up. Then the eviction notice came. She paused, looking down at her worn boots. Never thought I'd end up here. Kept thinking I could turn it around, you know. But when you're down, seems like everything keeps pushing you lower. Trump listened, really listened, something the crowd wasn't used to seeing. No interruptions, no quick solutions, just attention to every word. His face grew more serious with each detail of her story. The veteran told him about the endless cycle, can't get a job without an address, can't get an address without a job. About the shelters that were often full or unsafe. About the VA system that seemed designed to wear people down rather than build them up. The hardest part, she continued, her voice catching slightly, is that I've got family. A teenager staying with relatives upstate. Can't even provide for my own child. This detail seemed to hit Trump particularly hard. He looked at his aide, then back at the veteran. Why haven't you reached out to veteran organizations? Trump asked, not accusingly but with genuine curiosity. The veteran gave a small, tired smile. I did, sir, many times. Got put on waiting lists, filled out forms, made calls. After a while, you start to feel like just another number in the system. The crowd had grown larger now, but remained surprisingly quiet, hanging on every word of the conversation. Many had tears in their eyes, especially other veterans who recognized pieces of their own struggles in her story. Some were filming, but most just stood in respectful silence, witnessing a rare moment of genuine human connection. Trump pulled out his phone, his face set with determination. The veteran watched, confused, as he stepped slightly aside and began making calls. His security detail exchanged glances. This was definitely not part of the day's planned schedule. But something about this veteran's story had struck a chord, and everyone could see that what was unfolding here was far more important than any planned meeting or appearance. The morning sun had risen higher now, its rays catching the veteran's service pins still proudly displayed on her jacket. They were tarnished but had been carefully preserved, a small reminder of who she was, of the pride and dignity she'd maintained despite everything. As Trump finished his first call and turned back toward her, neither of them knew that this chance encounter was about to change not just one life, but spark a movement that would help countless others. The crowd watched in amazement as Trump finished his phone call and turned back to the veteran with purpose in his eyes. I just spoke to my friend who owns the Grand Hyatt, he said, pointing to the towering building just blocks away. There's a room waiting for you, not just for tonight, for as long as you need it. The veteran's eyes widened, her military composure briefly cracking. Sir, I can't accept that, she stammered, her hands gripping her worn backpack tighter. Trump shook his head firmly. You've earned this. You served our country. Now it's time we served you. But Trump wasn't finished. He made another call, this time pacing slightly as he spoke in low, intense tones. The veteran stood quietly, still processing what was happening. Around them, the crowd had grown even larger, with office workers calling their bosses to say they'd be late. This was something different, something real, not a publicity stunt or a photo op. My personal physician will meet you at the hotel in an hour, Trump announced after finishing his second call. Full checkup, whatever you need. He turned to one of his security team members. Make sure she gets there safely. The guard nodded, his usual stern expression softening slightly. The veteran struggled to find words. Mr. President, why would you do all this? Her voice wavered slightly, unused to accepting help after so long of just trying to survive. Trump's response was immediate and sincere. Because this shouldn't happen, not to anyone who wore our uniform, not in our country. One of Trump's aides approached with a business card, but Trump waved it away. Instead, he took out his own card and wrote something on the back. This is my private number, he said, handing it to the veteran. If you hit any roadblocks, any at all, you call. No going through secretaries or assistants. Direct line. The veteran held the card like it was made of glass, her weathered hands trembling slightly. A woman in the crowd couldn't hold back anymore and called out, "God bless you, Mr. President." Others joined in with words of support, not just for Trump, but for the veteran as well. Trump's security team was getting antsy. They were way behind schedule now. But their protectee wasn't done yet. He pulled aside his chief of staff, speaking quickly but firmly. The aide nodded repeatedly, taking rapid notes on his phone. Whatever was being planned, it was clear this wasn't going to end with just a hotel room and a doctor's visit. "There's something else you should know," Trump said, turning back to the veteran. "I've got friends at several veteran support organizations. Real support, not just paperwork and waiting lists. They'll be reaching out today." He emphasized the word today while looking pointedly at his aide, who was already making more calls. A young hotel employee had arrived, slightly out of breath from running over. He carried a key card and some paperwork. Trump took the key card but waved away the paperwork. "Bill it to me directly," he said, "and make sure she gets whatever she needs, meals, clothes, anything." The veteran started to protest again, but Trump held up his hand. "You know what the real problem is?" he asked, his voice carrying to the silent crowd. "It's not just about you. There are thousands more like you out there. Good people who served their country, who did everything right, and still ended up in impossible situations." He gestured to the crowd, where several people were wiping away tears. "Every person here is thinking the same thing. This isn't right. This isn't how we should treat our veterans. So maybe today we start fixing it. One person at a time if we have to." The hotel employee stepped forward respectfully, ready to escort the veteran to her room. Trump's security detail was practically dancing with impatience now, but their boss had one more thing to say. He looked the veteran straight in the eye, his voice firm. "This isn't charity. This is America paying a debt we owe. You just rest today. Tomorrow, we start working on the real solution." As the veteran gathered her few belongings, the crowd spontaneously began to applaud. Not the polite, political kind of applause, but real, heartfelt clapping mixed with cheers and even a few tears. They weren't just clapping for Trump or for the veteran, they were applauding what they'd witnessed, a moment of genuine human connection and immediate action that cut through all the usual red tape and excuses. Later that afternoon, in a pristine doctor's office near the hotel, the true complexity of the veteran's situation began to unfold. The physician Trump had called, a kind-faced man with decades of experience, listened carefully as she described her struggles with PTSD and chronic pain from an old combat injury. "Why didn't the VA help with this?" he asked, reviewing her medical history. The veteran's tired smile held years of frustration. "They did at first," she explained. "But every time I got a new doctor, the treatment plan changed. Then the appointments started getting pushed back months at a time. You can't hold down a job when you're in constant pain, waiting for appointments that keep getting rescheduled." As the doctor conducted his examination, Trump's aide was busy in the hotel lobby, making calls and uncovering more of the story. The veteran's teenage daughter was living with elderly relatives in a small town upstate. They were doing their best, but living on a fixed income meant they could barely make ends meet. The daughter had been trying to find part-time work after school to help out, putting her own education at risk. The aide's research also revealed something that made his heart sink. The veteran had applied for help through 3 different veteran support organizations. Each time, she'd gotten tangled in bureaucratic red tape, missing documents, lost paperwork, system errors. One organization had even sent her approval letter to an old address after she'd already lost her home. Back in the doctor's office, the examination was wrapping up when Trump himself walked in. He'd rearranged his entire schedule, canceling several high-profile meetings to personally oversee the situation. The doctor pulled him aside, speaking in low tones about the veteran's medical needs, proper medication, physical therapy, and most importantly, consistent mental health support. "We can fix this," Trump said firmly, then turned to the veteran. "But there's something you need to tell me. Why didn't you mention your daughter earlier?" His voice wasn't accusatory, but gentle, understanding. The veteran's strong facade finally cracked. "Because I'm ashamed," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. What kind of mother lives on the street while her child? She couldn't finish the sentence. Trump sat down across from her, his usual commanding presence softened by genuine concern. "Let me tell you what kind of mother," he said. "The kind who served her country through 3 combat tours. The kind who's been fighting a war nobody can see since coming home. The kind who's too proud to ask for help because others might need it more. That's not shame, that's strength." He pulled out his phone, showing her something on the screen. "While you were with the doctor, my team's been busy. Your daughter's relatives. They're struggling too. Already sent someone to help them out. And there's a good school near the hotel, much better than where your daughter is now. If you want, we can have her here by tomorrow." The veteran stared at him, speechless. Trump continued, his voice firm but kind. "But here's the deal, you have to let us help. Really help. Not just today, not just with a hotel room. You need proper treatment, job training, everything. You fought for this country. Now let this country fight for you." A nurse poked her head in. There were reporters gathering outside, word having spread about the morning's events. Trump waved them away through his security team. "This isn't about publicity," he said. "This is about doing what's right." He stood up, straightening his tie. "Get some rest. Take your medication. Tomorrow morning, my team will be here with a plan, not just for you, but maybe for other veterans in similar situations. Sometimes it takes one story to wake people up." The veteran managed to find her voice. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. Trump shook his head. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. Your story is going to help a lot of people. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is let others see us when we're down, so they know they're not alone." As Trump left the doctor's office, his phone was already ringing with calls from veteran organizations, business leaders, and politicians, all wanting to know how they could help. The morning's chance encounter was growing into something bigger, a spotlight on a problem too long ignored, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of a real solution. The next morning brought more than just sunrise to New York City. Trump's team had been working through the night, pulling together resources and making connections. By dawn, they had assembled what they called Operation Veteran Restore, a comprehensive plan that went far beyond helping just one homeless veteran. The veteran woke up in her hotel room, still adjusting to sleeping in a real bed after so many months on the streets. A hot shower and clean clothes had worked wonders, but the biggest change was the hope in her eyes. When Trump's team arrived for their morning meeting, they found her sitting straight-backed in a chair, military bearing intact, ready to face whatever came next. "First things first," Trump's head of Veteran Affairs said, laying out several folders. "We've found you an apartment, not temporary housing, a real home." He slid over some photos of a modest but clean 2-bedroom apartment near good schools. "Mr. Trump has personally covered 6 months' rent to get you started." The veteran's hands trembled as she looked at the photos. "But that's not all," the aide continued. "We've got something even better." He pulled out another folder. 3 companies want to interview you for security consulting positions. They specifically want someone with your military background and experience. Trump himself walked in then, bringing more surprising news. "Your daughter's on her way," he announced. "My team spoke with her relatives last night. They're wonderful people, been doing their best to help. We've set them up with some support too. No child should have to worry about their elderly relatives while also worrying about their parent." The veteran stood up quickly, military training automatically kicking in at Trump's entrance. "Sir, this is too much. I can't accept all this." Trump's response was immediate. "You already earned it, every bit of it, but here's what I want in return." He pulled up a chair and sat down, gesturing for her to do the same. "Your story. It's already spreading. Videos from yesterday have gone viral. My phone's been ringing nonstop. Business leaders, politicians, veteran organizations. They all want to help. Not just you. They want to help fix the system." Trump's eyes lit up with determination. "So here's my deal. We help you get back on your feet, and you help us help others. Once you're settled, would you be willing to be part of a veteran advisory board? Help identify where the system breaks down. Show us how to fix it." The veteran sat straighter, a sense of purpose returning to her bearing. "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir." Just then, Trump's aide received a message and smiled. The morning news shows are all covering the story, but they're not focused on Mr. Trump, they're talking about veteran homelessness. Real numbers, real problems, real solutions. People are paying attention. Trump nodded approvingly. That's exactly what we wanted. Sometimes it takes one story to open people's eyes. He turned back to the veteran. You're not just getting help, you're going to help change the system. Your experience, your insight, it's valuable. You're not a charity case, you're part of the solution. As if to prove his point, his phone buzzed again. Another CEO, he said, checking the message, wants to create a veteran hiring program. Fast-track employment for homeless vets. See? Change is already happening. The veteran looked at the apartment photos again, then at the job offers. I never thought, she started, then caught herself. I mean, yesterday morning, I was just trying to stay warm. And now? Trump's aide interrupted gently. Your daughter's car just pulled up downstairs. The veteran stood up so quickly she almost knocked over her chair. Trump smiled. Go on, he said. Go see your daughter. We'll handle the paperwork later. As she hurried out, Trump turned to his team. Make sure every detail is taken care of. And start gathering data on other homeless vets in the city. This isn't a one-time feel-good story. This is just the beginning. The video of Trump's sidewalk encounter had already reached millions of views. But more importantly, it had reached the right people, those with the power to make real changes. In boardrooms and government offices across the country, people were asking hard questions. How did we let this happen? And more importantly, how did we fix it? The veteran's story was becoming more than just a viral moment. It was becoming a movement. And as she hugged her daughter in the hotel lobby for the first time in months, she didn't know that her worst day had just become the catalyst for helping thousands of others like her. A week after the sidewalk encounter, the ripple effects were turning into waves. News channels couldn't stop talking about the story, but not for the usual political reasons. Instead, they focused on the shocking statistics about homeless veterans, the gaps in the system, and most importantly, the solutions being proposed. In a quiet cafe near her new apartment, the veteran sat across from a reporter. Her daughter was at school nearby, her new school, where she was already making friends. The veteran wore a crisp business suit, ready for her second job interview of the day. She looked like a different person, but her eyes still held the wisdom of someone who'd seen both sides of life. I almost didn't tell my story that day, she admitted to the reporter. When you're on the streets, you learn to be invisible. But Mr. Trump, he didn't just see me. He saw the whole problem. She paused, collecting her thoughts. And now, others are starting to see it too. She wasn't exaggerating. Since the video went viral, 3 major corporations had announced veteran hiring initiatives. A real estate developer in Chicago had pledged 50 apartments for homeless veterans. A healthcare company was offering free mental health services. The dominoes were falling, one by one. But the biggest change was happening in Washington. Politicians from both parties were suddenly very interested in veteran homelessness. The VA was under pressure to explain their waiting lists and rejected claims. Trump had started making calls, pushing for real reform, not just quick fixes. Yesterday, the veteran continued, I spoke to a group of business leaders. Told them what it's really like, the way the system breaks down, how one missed appointment can start a downward spiral. They actually listened, really listened. She smiled slightly. One CEO cried. Said he had no idea it was this bad. Promised to hire at least 30 veterans by the end of the month. The reporter's phone buzzed. Another company had just announced a veteran support program. This one was offering free job training and certification courses. It's amazing how fast things are moving, the reporter noted. The veteran nodded. But you know what really matters? The other veterans. The ones still out there. Her voice grew passionate. Every day, more people are reaching out. Veterans who were afraid to ask for help before. They see this story and think, maybe someone will listen to me too. She pulled out her phone, showing the reporter a message. This morning, a veteran in Boston got housing because his local shelter saw the story and contacted one of the new programs. In California, a veteran family moved into an apartment yesterday. It's happening everywhere. Trump's team had been busy too. They'd created a task force, bringing together business leaders, veteran advocates, and housing experts. The veteran was a key advisor, her experience helping shape real solutions. We're not just throwing money at the problem, she explained. We're fixing the broken parts of the system. Her phone buzzed, a reminder for her job interview. The reporter had one last question. What would you say to other veterans who are struggling right now? The veteran stood, straightening her jacket. I'd tell them don't give up. Change is coming. Real change. She smiled warmly. And I'd tell them something Mr. Trump told me. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let others help you. As she left the cafe, a group of construction workers recognized her from the news. They called out words of support, and one veteran among them saluted. She returned the salute, remembering how just days ago, people would cross the street to avoid her. The reporter watched her walk away, noting how she carried herself now, with purpose, with hope. The story wasn't just about one chance encounter anymore. It had become a movement, a catalyst for real change. And it all started because one person stopped to listen on a cold New York morning. Back at Trump's office, the phones kept ringing. More companies wanting to help, more veterans reaching out, more solutions being offered. His aide brought in the latest numbers. Hundreds of veterans already helped, thousands more in the pipeline. The ripple effect was growing stronger every day. This is how real change happens, Trump had said earlier that morning. One person at a time, one story at a time, until everyone starts paying attention. He'd been right. The veteran's story had opened eyes and hearts, and now it was opening doors, not just for her, but for thousands of others who'd served their country and needed their country to serve them back. 3 months had passed since that life-changing morning outside Grand Central Station. The veteran stood at a podium, addressing a packed conference room of business leaders, politicians, and media. She wore her military medals on her business suit, no longer tarnished, but polished and proud. When Mr. Trump stopped to talk to me that day, I thought it was just about one person helping another, she began, her voice strong and clear. I had no idea it would turn into something this big. She gestured to the screens behind her, showing the numbers. Over 3,000 veterans housed, 5,000 employed, and countless more receiving medical care and support. In the front row, Trump sat quietly, letting her have the spotlight. He kept his promise. This was never about publicity for him. It was about fixing a broken system. The veteran continued, sharing the real victories. Last week, a veteran in Miami got his life back. Week before that, a veteran family in Seattle found a home. Yesterday, a veteran in Chicago started a new job. She pulled out a worn piece of paper, the cardboard sign she'd held that cold morning. I kept this as a reminder, not of being homeless, but of how quickly things can change when people decide to care. The audience sat in respectful silence, many wiping away tears. The veteran's daughter sat in the audience too, beaming with pride. She was thriving in her new school, no longer worried about adult problems no teenager should face. Their apartment had become a real home, filled with photos and hope and the sound of laughter. But the real story isn't about me, the veteran continued. It's about what happens when we stop walking past problems and start fixing them. She clicked to the next slide, showing the new programs that had sprung up nationwide. Companies had created veteran hiring initiatives. Property developers had pledged housing. Healthcare providers had stepped up with free services. Trump's original task force had grown into a national movement. The VA was undergoing major reforms, with new policies shaped by real veteran experiences. Wait times were down. Approval rates were up. The system was finally starting to work the way it should. You know what the best part is? The veteran asked, her voice warming. Now when I walk past Grand Central Station, I don't see any homeless veterans. Not because they're hiding, because they're housed. They're working. They're getting the help they had earned. She shared a recent story about a veteran she'd met, a young soldier who'd started struggling after returning home. But this time, she said, the system caught him before he fell. No more waiting lists, no more lost paperwork, no more empty promises, real help right away. Trump stood up then, joining her at the podium. When I stopped that morning, he said, I had no special plan. I just knew something had to change. He turned to the veteran. You did the hard part. You shared your story. You showed us where the system was broken. And now you're helping fix it. The veteran smiled, remembering something. Mr. Trump gave me his personal number that first day. Told me to call if I hit any roadblocks. She paused. I never had to use it, because he made sure there weren't any roadblocks. Not for me, not for any veteran who needs help. The audience rose in a standing ovation, but it wasn't just applause they were offering. Business cards were being passed, more pledges made, more doors opening. The movement was still growing, still gaining strength. After the presentation, in a quiet moment backstage, the veteran looked at Trump. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for helping me, but for showing others how to help." Trump shook his head. "You did the hard part," he repeated. "You showed America what courage really looks like. Sometimes it takes more courage to accept help than to give it." As they walked out together, reporters called out questions, cameras flashed. But this wasn't about politics or publicity. This was about something bigger, about a country finally learning to take care of its own, about problems being solved instead of ignored, about hope replacing despair. The veteran's final words at the podium summed it up best. "A few months ago, I was invisible. Today, we're helping thousands of veterans become visible again. And we're not done yet. Not even close, because every veteran matters, every story matters, and when we stop to listen, when we decide to care, that's when real change begins." As she left the conference center, another veteran saluted her. She returned it proudly, knowing that her worst day had become a turning point, not just for her, but for thousands of others who'd served their country and needed their country to serve them back. The morning that began with a simple act of kindness had grown into a nationwide movement of hope and change, proving that sometimes the biggest solutions start with the smallest moments of human connection.